Greetings. This is Dr. Mustafa Ansari from the African Descendant Institute of Human Rights. I'm here with our UN Human Rights Defender, Ms. Cecile Johnson. First of all, we want to thank you for coming in and joining us on this webinar. We have been off for the last 2 weeks because of technical intrusions. And we have just now been able to rectify that in a way that we are comfortable now in presenting our webinars to you that will continue for the next 13 weeks. These webinars are going to be free, and we are going to make it a point to make sure that they are widely distributed. This Today's webinar is going to be, as the screen suggests, on the state of the African descendant in the United States and why we should decolonize. I'd like to introduce to you at this time our speaker on this topic, Ms. Cecile Johnson, our UN Human Rights Defender. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ansari. Greetings, family. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about the state of the African descendants, and I am going to take myself off the screen so that you can see some of the slides, okay? So the goal of the webinar today and the topics to be covered in week 3 is when we wrote our request to the Decolonization Committee, we included some data, and this data described the conditions we were facing. This data is on top of data that the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent received in January of 2016 on their country visit to the USA. And part of my work was a part of that data that was given in, along with hundreds of people who came out to 7 cities and gave testimony as to our conditions. That led to the UN Working Group of Experts saying to the UN in September of that year that the African descendants in the United States were owed reparations. So today, students are going to understand some key data on the African descendant community and how to begin to look at the data from what we call an African-centered or an African national perspective. This data is going to help you to understand why we have chosen the path of self-determination and why we must be colonized. So get your pens and your paper. We got some key concepts. What is self-determination? Learning to see from an African national perspective. Something called the Human Development Index, the 5 elements of genocide, the right to an education, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So these are some of the things that we're going to go over today, okay? So the reality for African descendants in the United States is that we are a minority in a majority hostile state. We are non-self-governing. And the only way a minority can have power in a majority state is through self-determination. What is self-determination? The right to self-determination is the right of a people to determine its own destiny. The principle allows a people to choose its own political status and to determine its own form of economic, cultural, and social development. Exercise of this right can result in a variety of different outcomes, ranging from political independence through to full integration within a state. Okay, so make sure you understand that. So learning to see the community from an African national perspective. What exactly does that mean? Many times I say from an African-centered perspective. When you throw something at me, all I want to know is how is it going to impact us as African descendant people, okay? So you got to learn to see this because our education system has not given you that ability many times. So in the past, we would look at an economy and we say, wow, the economy is doing good. And if that was doing good, then the people must be doing good. That really did not capture accurately what was happening, right? So today we have another lens that people look through. It's called the Human Development Index. And what this Human Development Index asks is, how are the people doing? This Human Development Index measures well-being in 3 vital areas: health, education, and earnings, right? You need to have a long and healthy life. Do you have access to knowledge? That's education. And do you have a decent standard of living based on the fact that you have this education? You're able to have skills to do something and live to your full potential. Now, the next thing you need to write down is the 5 elements of the crime of genocide. Don't forget that you'll be able to go back on the video. This video is going to be up on YouTube. And so you'll be able to, stop the video and write some of these things down. So the 5 elements of the crime of genocide is genocide by killing, genocide by causing serious bodily or mental harm, genocide by deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction, genocide by imposing measures intended to prevent birth, genocide by forcibly transferring children. And you just really have to have one of those elements to say that, yes, you are suffering from the effect of genocide. But in our case, we fit many of those elements, right? We have unarmed Black people being killed by the police. We have mass incarceration of our community. Police occupying our communities. We have a lack of economic investments in our communities, and that has created many of the inflicted conditions on life to calculate to bring about physical destruction. That's why we have high crime. We have all this stuff happening, poor health, substandard access to food and healthcare, leading to the worst health in the country. African descendants have the worst health in the country, and I'll show you. We have highest infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rates, and a high placement of our children in foster care. And that placement in foster care has negative effects because we've found, like in California, that many of the people who are incarcerated have a history of having been in foster care. So this destruction of our families is a definite outcome of a plan of how to destroy a people. So the 5 elements of the crime of genocide, this is very important. So let's look at some of the data based on the Human Development Index lens, right? So in 2010, the Human Development Index score for the US was 5.03. And of that, Asian Americans was 7.21, whites 5.43, Latinos 4.05, African Americans 3.81, and Native Americans 3.55. But when you looked at, say, 10 US metro areas, right, what you saw was that consistently Black and Latinos were at the bottom of the Human Development Index chart. We already have Blacks at the bottom overall, but in places like Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., you see from the chart, the blue areas is the African Americans, and the purple is the Latinos. You see that we're consistently at the bottom of the chart, right? And in cities like Chicago, we're way below. Miami, we're below, right? Philadelphia, we're below. So what exactly does this mean? So HDI has health. Under health, it's a long and healthy life. Blacks have the lowest life expectancy for males and females. You look at the little chart to the left, you'll see that as it relates to how long people live, we have a life expectancy of 75.6 years, and whites can expect to live on average for 79 years. I know when you live in, say, Chicago, the life expectancy disparity is actually 14 years, depending on where you live, right? Depending on your zip code, 14 years. So many of our Black people never live to 75.6 years. Much less 70 years. So many who have paid into the system will never end up getting anything out of it because they die, many of them from in their 50s, 60s, early 60s. And then when it comes to homicide, the Black rate ages 18 to 34 is 9 times as high as the rate among whites, right? And when it comes to Blacks aged 35 to 49, it's 5 times as high as among whites. So when you look at life expectancy, these are the things. So you're dying from natural causes, and you're also dying from homicide, which we have a disproportionate effect on in our communities. So the Washington Post states, embedded within the trends for African American health are some troubling statistics. When it comes to HIV, they're 7 to 9 times more likely than whites to succumb to the disease. Homicide, as we just spoke before, is off the chain. 5 times white rate, 9 times white rate, depending on the age group. Poverty, unemployment. Blacks are still more likely than whites to live in poverty, to be unemployed, and to lack home ownership. There's also likely to report that they can't afford medical care. And obesity rate is higher, right? Now, that's kind of interesting as it relates to obesity, because we're one of the few places where you have poor people being obese. And the poor people who are obese, in most countries where you're poor and you have obesity, obesity is usually the rich. In the United States, because of there being lack of access to proper food, people eat more at times because their body's craving the calories, but in reality, they're not getting the nutrition. So it's causing these adverse health conditions. So what Dr. Cunningham says here is that it's important to invest in the places where people live so they can eat healthier food, get physical activity in safe places, and quit smoking if they started. And that getting physical activity in safe spaces is one of the reasons why Blacks are also having obesity, especially amongst the children, because in neighborhoods, the homicide rate is high, so parents don't want to send their children outside, so the children end up staying inside instead of in front of the TV, eating snacks, right? Not good. So the leading causes of death for Blacks, number one is heart disease, cancer, unintentional injuries, stroke. As you see, we're the only group that has homicide listed. Diabetes, chronic lower respiratory disease, kidney disease, HIV disease. That's the only group that has that also, and sepsis. Sepsis is a serious bloodstream infection, right? So this is the state of our Black health. Black communities have easier access to fast food than fresh food. Look at the brown figure, and in the diagram, you'll see we can get a hamburger before we get an apple. In the Latino community, in the white community, in the Asian community, it is almost even, all right? So sometimes when people say it's not just poverty, it's our communities, it's a racial issue. So if we have no or distant grocery stores, we have an imbalance in health food options. And this will likely increase premature death and chronic health conditions. That's also, when you look at infant mortality, right, you see that infant mortality is highest for Black babies. It's double the national average. The national average is about 5 per 1,000. That's what it is for whites. Ours is 11 per 1,000. And as you can see from the chart on the left, at least 12 per 1,000. Blacks, again, are the highest, right? So when it comes to maternal mortality, Black women are dying at 3 to 4 times the rate of non-Hispanic white mothers, and infants born to African Americans are dying at twice the rate as infants born to non-Hispanic white mothers. So these two trends hold true across education levels and even across socioeconomic status, because as you can see, even the tennis star Serena Williams, a wealthy and remarkably powerful woman and in good health, nearly died from pregnancy-related complications, right? So a disturbing trend is that maternal mortality has gone up for the United States compared to other developed countries. And what they found was that it was very high in places like the District of Columbia, New Jersey, Georgia, and Arkansas, and especially among Black women, right? So researchers have theorized that an increase in obesity, particularly acute amongst poor Black women, right, who have much higher rates of maternal mortality than whites, may be contributing to the factor. When we are self-determined, we will have our own doctors and researchers who can focus in on what are these underlying conditions that are impacting us so disproportionately. And when it comes to growing evidence that there's racial health disparities are not due just to lifestyle, right? It's also that when you go to the doctor, they force you to wait longer. Now, only 5.7% of the physicians in the United States are Black in 2016, right? And it used to be 3.5% in 2008, so we've seen a little increase. Now, this is not good because we are 12% of the population, yet only 5.7% of the physicians are Black. So many times we go to the doctor, we don't see somebody who looks like us or somebody who understands us from a cultural perspective. Now, the Human Development Index, number 2, is education. And that usually refers to educational degree attainment and enrollment. But we're going to look a little bit further from an African-centered perspective. So before we get into that, I want you to understand, because this is a human rights class, that education is not a privilege. It's a fundamental human right. Education as a human right means the right to education is guaranteed legally for all without discrimination, right? And states have an obligation to protect, to respect, and fulfill the rights to education. There are ways to hold states accountable for violations of deprivations of the rights to education. What guarantees education as a right? International human rights law guarantees the right to education. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights, adopted in 1948, proclaimed in Article 26, everyone has the right to education. Write that down. Since then, the right to education has been widely recognized and developed by a number of international normative instruments elaborated by the UN. So You have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, and the Convention on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, right? The right that is guaranteed as an education is a right that is guaranteed under all of these human rights laws. It has been reaffirmed in other treaties covering specific groups, that's like women and girls, persons with disabilities, migrants, refugees, indigenous people, or context, which is education during armed conflict. It has also been incorporated into various regional treaties and enshrined as a right in the vast majority of national constitutions. So you've got to remember this. Education is a right. Everyone has the right to an education. So why is the right to education fundamental? Both individuals and society benefit from this right to education. It is a fundamental for human social and economic development and a key element to achieving lasting peace and sustainable development. It's a powerful tool in developing the full potential of everyone and in promoting individual and collective well-being. In brief, it is an empowerment right. When people are educated, they make better citizens in your society, right? It lifts marginalized groups out of poverty. These marginalized groups, the children will be trained and educated so they can either go to college, go to the trades, and they'll be able to have jobs that will lift their families out of poverty. And it's indispensable means of realizing other rights, because now that you're educated, right, you're able to check up when things happen, you're able to follow through, you're able to write letters, you're able to speak before, you're able to do things that are going to empower you to exercise and make sure that other people do not deny you your rights. And this education contributes to the full development of the human personality. You're able to read, do so many different things, right? So that's why education is a fundamental right. So, as we said, it's coming under Article 13 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It's both a human right and an indispensable means of realizing other human rights. Please turn off the microphone. Dr. Ansari.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. So as an empowerment right, education is the primary vehicle by which economically and socially marginalized adults and children can lift themselves out of poverty and obtain the means to participate fully in their communities. Guys, I really want you to understand that, okay? Education has a vital role in empowering women and safeguarding children from exploitative and hazardous labor and sexual exploitation, in promoting human rights and democracy, in protecting the environment and controlling population growth. Increasingly, education is recognized as one of the best financial investments states can make. But the importance of education is not just practical. A well-educated, enlightened, and active mind is able to wander freely and widely, is one of the joys and rewards of the human existence. So let's get into some of the data. Remember, Human Development Indicator number 2, access to knowledge, and in their case, they look at educational degree attainment and school enrollment. Well, I'm going to go the African national, African-centered way and go a little bit deeper. So in 2013, for the first time, white students were now down to 50% of the public school population, right? Blacks went from 17 to 16%, and Hispanics went from 19 to 25%, and Asian Pacific Islanders went up from 4 to 5%. In fall 2018, about 56.6 million. So we are a country of about 310, 20 million people, and 56.6 million students will attend elementary and secondary school. So those are our population under 18, right? In public schools, 50.7 million students are there and 5.9. So only 10% of the students go to private schools. And of the public schools, in pre-K through grade 8, there's 35.6 million. And grade 9, we have 15.1 million people in high school. Now, current expenditures for public and secondary education are projected to be $654 billion for the 2018-2019 school year. And currently, the expenditures is projected to be about $12,900 for the school year. But we all know that depending on the state that you live in, it's either more or less, right? So why is this expenditure for education important? It's important because when we want to have our own school districts, we want to control our own schools. So the money that's currently being spent per child should be spent per child in our school districts for us to educate our children. When it comes to high school graduates, 3.6 million are expected to graduate in 2018-2019. And of that, 3.3 million of them are from the public high schools and 0.4 million is from the private. When it comes to college enrollment, we have 19.9 million people enrolled in the fall of 2018, right? Females are expected to account for the majority of college and university students in the fall 2018, about 11.2 million females compared to 8.7 million males. This is important because as it relates to African Americans, we see the same trend. More Black women are going to college versus Black men, who many are ending up being incarcerated. So they're more incarcerated than in college, okay? So also more students are expected to attend full time. So human development, approximately 32 million adults in the United States can't read, right? And most of 50% of US adults can't read a book written at 8th grade level. Why am I telling you this? This is important because when you begin to look at the data, you're going to see who many of those who can't read are, okay? This is what the School-to-Prison Pipeline and the Road to Zero Net Wealth looks like. In 2015, they had 4th and 8th grade scores. Each year, they test the students in our schools. And the 4th and 8th grade are very important years, right? 4th grade is before you finish 5th grade. You're almost finished with elementary. So at that level, we expect that you should have some proficiency to take you now to middle school. And in the 8th grade, we've given you 8 years of education plus K plus kindergarten, so 9 years of education. So we expect that you are now ready for high school. But let's look at the reality and what's going on in the United States. In the United States in 2015, 4th graders, Black 4th graders, only 19% of them were proficient in math, right? And when it came to 8th grade, only 13% were proficient in math. When it came to reading, 18% were proficient in the 4th grade and 16% were proficient in the 8th grade. Now, folks, this is very critical because if they can't read and they can't do math, how will they be able to perform when they get to high school, right? 13% doing math on level, 16% reading on level. Well, when they get to high school, the teachers expect that they're now at high school level. So can you imagine how frustrating it is to a teacher who's got a high school curriculum and now they have to teach children who are still at 3rd, 4th, maybe even 5th grade reading level, if that high, okay? So when you look at 4th and 8th grade, what I did is I compared those same children. The ones who were in 2011 were now the ones who were in 2015, 4 years later. And so when you look at 2011, 17% of the Black children were proficient. And when you went to 2015, that had dropped to 13%. So we've not seen an increase. We've actually seen a decrease as they got older, meaning they're learning even less. When it came to reading, same thing. 2011, 17%. And when we looked at 2015, 16%, right? So 84% of Black youth are still not reading on level. 84%, right? So they have shown no improvement between 4th grade and 8th grade. In fact, they've done worse. So if the children are doing so poorly at 8th grade, how do we explain these high education graduation numbers, right? They say that Black youth are graduating, 75% of them are graduating from high school. But if they can't read, how is that possible, right? And how do we know that some fraud is happening? Because if 76% of the Black students are graduating, but only 33% of those are proficient in English, and that's, and 13% are proficient in math per the ACT exam, what exactly does the 76% graduation rate mean? So the taxpayers are paying $139,000 on average. You add up all those years, right? For students from K to 12. And what are we getting in return? We're getting students, especially Black students, who are not proficient, right? 13% proficient in math and 33% proficient in English, but in reality, only 16% can read. So I don't even understand how 34% are proficient in English. That's probably the writing test, and that's subjective, right? 10% are proficient in science. In all 4 subject areas, Black high school graduates had lower readiness benchmarks than every other racial or ethnic group, including Hispanics. And many of the children may come in speaking another language and yet are doing better than Black children who are native to the United States. This doesn't make any sense, right? Now, part of this, I would say to you, is the issue of English as a second language. Go into our communities. You notice that we speak a dialect many times. Black children are not speaking English. So what we need in our communities is for you to demand ESL, English as a second language funding for our community, for our children. Because other groups come in and get the ESL extra dollars, are able to improve and become ready, and our children are still falling behind because there's this myth that they are speaking proper English. They're not. That's why they're not able to read properly or do their other subjects properly. So write that down. Look into English as a second language as an option when it comes to educating Black children in your area. So 8 years from today, when the uneducated becomes the unemployed, right? We got this little child innocently sitting in his chair, struggling to read, not understanding the ramification of an unjust education. But 6 years from now, his life prospects will be significantly lower than that of his more educated peers. And that's what we see happening to us in the United States. So in Huey Newton, he said, during those long years in Oakland Public School, I did not have one teacher who taught me anything relevant to my own life or experience. Not one instructor ever awoke in me a desire to learn more or to question or to explore the world of literature, science, and history. All they did was try to rob me of my sense of my own uniqueness and worth, and in the process nearly killed my urge to inquire. So when he graduated in 1959, he couldn't read, right? So can you imagine? He was one of that statistics too, where they claimed we're graduating, but the man couldn't read. So after he finished high school, he taught himself how to read. He started questioning everything in his autobiography. He says, most of all, I questioned what was happening in my own family and in the community around me. This was the start of his involvement in the civil rights movement. So I'm saying to you, as we pointed out before, the role of education is to create a citizen, a person, a member of your community who is going to understand what is going on. He's going to question what is going on. And then he's going to find solutions to those things. So when we allow the statistics that I just showed you and the poor achievement, and this poor achievement has a lot to do with the fact that our teachers don't really care. They don't care about our children, okay? So Julian Bond says violence is Black children going to school for 12 years and receiving 6 years worth of education. I want that to drop in your spirit, okay? That's what violence is, when you have denied these little children their right to a better future. And it's a deliberate thing because it's consistent. So again, why is the right to education fundamental? Because individuals and society benefits. And right now, the Black community is not benefiting from the right to an education, right? It's fundamental for human, social, and economic development. That's why we're suffering when it comes to all 3 of those areas. And it's a key element to achieving lasting peace. That's why we see so much violence in our community and violence against our community, right? And it leads to sustainable development. It's a powerful tool to develop the full potential of everyone and in promoting individual and collective well-being. In brief, it's an empowerment right. It lifts marginalized groups out of poverty. It's an indispensable means of realizing other rights. We have to be able to read and write and comprehend, right? To be able to think strategically, to lift our community up out of the poverty that it is in. And it contributes to the full development of the human personality. We want to develop a full human being. Now, there's another convention that you need to talk about. Write this down, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I mention this because, like we said before, there are a number of conventions that deal with the right to education and the rights of the child is one of them, right? Now, imagine the Convention on the Rights of the Child includes civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. And it sets these out in 54 articles and 2 optional protocols. It spells out the basic human rights that children everywhere have: the right to survival, to develop to the fullest, to protect them, protection from harmless influences, abuse, and exploitation, and to participate fully in family, cultural, and social life. Right? The 4 core principles of the Convention are non-discrimination, devotion to the best interests of the child, the right to life, survival, and development, and respect for the views of the child. The question then is, why is the United States the only country that stands alone and has not ratified this treaty? Who would deny a tribe the right to survival, to develop to its fullest, to protection from harmful influences, abuse, and exploitation? The United States has not ratified it because the United States is one of the perpetrators of those harmful influences, abuse, and exploitation of our children, right? And of our families, and of our culture, and of our social lives. And the United States is impacting our right to survive and to develop to the fullest. That's why they have not signed it. You need to know what is happening. So this is why we need self-determination. We'll not be able to have our own, we will be able to have our own school districts. Every state will have a board of education of our best educators who will look at the needs of our children, the current curriculum, which is sadly lacking. We'll look at staffing, look at teachers, payroll, buildings, etc. And this is going to bring millions of dollars to our community because the money that's coming down to educate per child will now come to us to educate our children, right? We will create school-centered communities and empower our community to provide services. This will increase jobs and employment for our community and decrease crime. One of the stablest jobs is education, teachers. Used to be we had more in our communities, but as you see in many places where they've closed some of the schools and they've always gotten rid of a lot of the Black professionals first, right? So we want to have schools that are school-centered communities. We want to be able to employ our own people who understand our children, who understand our culture, who speak our language, and be able to decrease the crime and increase opportunity and a vision of a better future for us with our children. So we're going to have nurturing teachers who are concerned about their overall education and well-being. We know that some of the reason why the children are not doing well is because these white teachers have very low expectations for them, okay? And they don't expect them to do anything and treat them as such. They are just warming the bench in many of our classrooms, okay? Parents will become more involved, and we will create the wraparound services that the children need in order to bring them and restore them back to whole. We'll now be able to prepare future adults to meet the needs and needs of our community, especially in STEAM. STEAM is science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. That's what makes a full human being. People able to participate in all of those areas. We can prepare future doctors, engineers, nurses, lawyers, communication experts, farmers. Folks, we need farmers, and we need educated farmers who are able to plant and grow crops in an organic way that can sustain our communities. We need there to be an emphasis on this, in having all these future doctors, engineers, nurses, lawyers, every need that the community has. We need to be able to prepare scientists, right, for it. So self-determination, folks, is our only remedy. We must make all of the decisions on our children and not leave it to our historical enemies to do this. What you see today is 60 plus years after Brown versus Board of Education and the Supreme Court decision. What you see is even local laws that have been passed, and what you see is a circumvention. They just did a big expose in South Carolina, the Post and Courier, a newspaper, and it did a whole thing on the state of education in South Carolina, and it shows you historically, coming out of slavery till now, how the legislature has found ways to circumvent our right to an education and what that has now done. This is very important because what South Carolina is looking at is this. You have a state that's allegedly on a boom, right? But it doesn't have the workers that it needs to meet those needs. So you see, all of this spitefulness and meanness and wickedness towards making sure our children do not get education is not going to hurt the state. going to hurt the state because it doesn't have the workers it needs who are ready, educated, prepared to now meet the needs to move the state forward and bring in the resources. We want to make sure that our children are educated so that they can meet the needs of our communities, our areas, because in those same areas where the children are not doing well are also some of the poorest areas in every state. We want to make sure that the HBCUs, the historical Black colleges, the PBIs, the predominantly Black institutions, are focused, tied to our community and able to help our community, are creating students, graduates who will be African-centered, African national in their perspective, and be able to participate with us in the self-determination. We want everyone who is going to school to begin to look at how will we take our talent back to us, to our community, to our community. Take care of your home and your community first. So please sign the signature page, right? You can go on our website, www.adconfederation.com. You can go on my website also, africandevelopmentplan.org, where I have a lot of links to different books and things so that you can get an idea of what has been happening to us historically, including the link to when the UN came, some of the documents that were submitted, all of that. And you can have a link to the National Black Agenda and some of the data that we have put up. So please become more interested. We want you to help us. Declared consent for self-determination and a request for decolonization, sign it. Take a picture of it and send it to adselfdetermination@protonmail.com, right? Or PDF it and send it to us. Sign it, send it. You can come in as an individual, family, organization, all three, not an either or, both and, right? We need you to come on board. And we also want you to purchase our book, The Process, Civil Rights to Human Rights. In this book, what we have done is broken down and use the example of the Jews and how they got reparation to show you that, yes, reparations is feasible. It's something that we should be able to get, right? And we explain how they got it. And the question is, why have we not got it when we have had this history of subjugation? We're prisoners of war still, and we've been under mass genocide for over 400 plus years. So I want you to go to the website. I want you to be a part of the census. You can register for the census on there as an individual and family, and there's a small fee. And let us know what role you want to play. How can you help? We don't want anybody sitting on the sidelines anymore, right? You can begin to prepare for your own liberation. How and what? What can you do? What role will you play? We need you to begin to organize community meetings. We need you to begin to vision what your community should look like. I need you to get involved in looking at the health of your community, right? We need you to begin to talk to your children. We need them educated. We need them looking at becoming nurses, doctors, healthcare workers. These are things that we need. We need you to begin to say, how can we get involved so we can save our children? Because this is really what it is. If we have no children, then we have no future. So we need you to get involved. The confederation that we formed is growing every day. We need you to become a member of it. We need you to also continue to look at these classes that we're showing and participate. This is number 3 of 16 weeks. And we will be continuing next week. Next week, I told you there were 3 things on the Human Development Index. And next week, we'll pick up on income, right? And there'll be a focus on economics. We'll get an opportunity to talk about the 5 steps to power and some other key things that you need to understand, which we call frames. So thank you. Dr. Ansari is going to come on board now.
Thank you so much, Cecile. That was illuminating. And as our UN Human Rights Defender just explained, we are going to be moving step by step through nation by nation, city by city to engage our community, because this is a very critical time. We have to be decisive. We can move our children out of this matrix. We can move ourselves out of this matrix. This move for education, just in and of itself, we're talking about maybe 20, $30 billion into our community and the wraparound services. We believe that having the school as a center of the community will give us an economic engine of which we can allocate uh, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in communities to make the most modern schools, to make the have the best teachers, to have the best
Mhm.
curriculum, to have the best wraparound services in the community, to have the school staffed by our cafeteria workers, by their meals prepared by our people to make sure that the children are nurtured. We want urban farms. We want our children to
Mhm.
understand the concepts of being having a place in a nation. This does
Right.
so much for our dignity worldwide as well as in the United States. Now people will be able to respect us. We will be able to respect ourselves. We would have intelligent children. We will begin to have intelligent, active communities who have now de, taken out the
Colonize their
value.
minds.
Yes, decolonized and taken out the violence and have increased the economic viability. Next week, we're going to start with Ms. Johnson's, our UN Human Rights Defender is going to deal with the data around our economics. We're going to show you the true benefits and why we should nationalize and decolonize. We have filed a request in the United Nations about a month ago. This is historic. We are on rarefied grounds now. We want your signatures. We want your participation. This does not happen mysteriously. This happens because of your consent and your participation. We want that. We need that. Your children needs that. They need a future. You have to make a decision now to allow them to have a chance, because right now statistics say that in the next 20 years or so, and surely by 2053, we will be in a near state of slavery because of our dwindling education and our dwindling populations and our dwindling health situations. We need to stop this flow right now, get on the pace of doing this. So please participate. We will be back next week. We will be back the weeks after that. We have a lot of ground to cover because we want to show you step by step, issue by issue, of the benefits of self determination. It will change our economic and human rights index to a level of being 12th in the world. And this is a very real potential that we have in our hands, and the destiny is in our hands. The destiny of our lives, the destiny of our children's lives are now in our hands. So we thank you again for joining us this week. Please tell your friends, organize in your community, start talking about these ideas. The civil rights
Mhm.
organizations do not have a remedy. Your pastors do not have a remedy. Your political
That's right.
scientists, professors don't have a remedy. We have a viable remedy that is now growing state by state, city by city. We're up to 100 organizations, and we are developing more and more colleagues as we move through this process. Be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. Thank you again. Signing off until next week. And Ms. Johnson, we thoroughly enjoyed that, and we will be looking forward to your presentation next week.
Thank you. Thank you. So, vision, please. Vision the future you want to see. What role do you want to play? It's something as simple as, you have children, right? And they are not doing well. So that means that you need to get tutors for them. It means that you need to be going over the homework with them. It means that you need to turn off the TV. There should be none in their bedrooms, right? It's something as simple as making sure that during the school week, the priority is schoolwork. Now, if they're not coming home with any schoolwork, then you need to be calling the school and going there to visit to find out why. You need
Mhm.
to be able to drop in on your child's school and go see what the state of that classroom is. What's really going on in that classroom, right? And you need to be empowering your child to speak. Talk to your children when they come home. Ask them what's going on, right? So some of the things that we want you to do are things that you should be doing as a parent, but it's also things that are going to strengthen us as a community. We want you to get involved. Do not just sit and accept this anymore. This is leading to our genocide. This is why our children are depressed. This is why our young men are walking with their pants hanging off their butts, right? We are, and they don't understand what that ramification really means. This is why 1 in 3 young Black people are involved in the criminal injustice system, right? This is why when people get locked up, they plea bargain and end up in jail over things that they didn't even do because they're not even educated enough to understand and to challenge and to push back and to seek help where they need to. We need you to understand the importance of this. And education is the heart of what a person needs to develop themselves. And when you look at us after this 500, 400 plus years under this barbaric condition and what is happening to us, Black people, wake up, right? What happens to you is happening to Black people globally also. So this is not just our struggle, it's a global struggle. And when you lift us up, you lift up other Black people globally. We're under genocide. We need you to understand what that means. Go over the slides. Look at those 5 areas. Look when you see what's happening daily. Say, oh, that's genocide, right? Now you have the words to identify it, right? And look at it. You are prisoners of war. And the conditions that we're under are inhumane. We want the world to understand what is happening to us. We live in the most developed country, and we are the most underdeveloped as a group of people. That is a violation of our human right and our dignity. We need you to get involved. Okay? So look over the Convention on the Child, look over the different education conventions that we mentioned, right? And understand them. Just read those slides, understand it. And now when you begin to look at what's happening with your own children, begin to identify how that's a violation, right? Now that's a practical skill. So when I say to you, we want you to learn to look at things like an African national. I used to call it African-centered perspective. I am a student of the Jacob Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, and we learned how to look at our community from an African-centered perspective. I want you to look at everything that is happening to us through the eyes of how is it impacting us, Black people. Every other community has no fear in saying, I'm here to represent the Latinos, I'm here to represent the Asians. We don't even have to mention white because most of the time that's all it's all about. We need to be brave and courageous and demand our right as African descendant people, as Black people, to have a quality of life that human beings have and should have. Okay? So go over our slides, share it, put it up on Facebook, put it up on LinkedIn, tweet it, get it out there. That's how you can help us. See, that's all free. We need help. We need help to get the word out. Educate your people. And if you have any questions, you can write us at AD-SelfDetermination, right? At protonmail.com. So if you have anything that you want to understand that we can put into future classes, that we already are building our curriculum, and you want to understand something, then let us know. But please, don't just sit by, don't let this go by. Share this link, share this. Be on board with us next time we come on. And if you're not on board, but you have time to watch it, when you come home in the evening, whatever, do that. That's great. And play it again and again till you get it. Now you're empowered. The greatest power that you have is as a parent to protect your child. I became an activist over what they tried to do to my children in education. That's why I study data. B, find out what's going on in your school. Look at your child's report card. Look at your school's report card. Do not allow them to take our taxpayer dollars and give us nothing in return. Get on board when we have that plebiscite vote. Sign that signature card. Buy that book and read it. And for those of you who have been uneducated through this whole process, we understand. So if one of the things that you need is for us to break things down simpler, and we will break it down simple so you can get it, right? Because you are our community. and we love and appreciate you, and we want better for you. We want better for our children. We don't want you crying every night and funerals on Saturday. We want to build a strong community. So that's what it's all about. Please. We'll see you next week. Peace.
All right. Thanks so much, Sel.